everybody. Welcome back to the first episode of 2024. Well, I don't know. They might have actually put one out, but this is the first one we're recording in 2024. Pro Physique coaches Evan Wells, IFBB Pro Evan Wells, and Lexie Maitland, who's are we in prep? Are we not in prep? What's happening, Lexie?
I don't know. We'll talk tomorrow when I check
All
in.
right. Well, I know what we're doing. I don't know what you're telling the universe on your YouTube channel right now.
Oh, gotcha.
Anyway, Lexie's going to compete this year. That's what
I've
we know.
gotta keep it suspenseful. Can't give out all the secrets yet.
And me and Evan are not going to compete this year. So barbecue
Absolutely
and
not.
tequila.
Yes.
And I owe Evan a big bottle of tequila, and I can finally have some with him. Yay.
How was it for you guys' Christmas and New Year's? Paul, you went on a little trip, didn't you?
So the day after Christmas, we packed up the kids. We flew to Atlanta. We went to the aquarium. Then we went to Stone Mountain. Then we drove up to a cabin in North Carolina, saw some snow, and then flew home yesterday. So yeah, it was a getaway with the family. Very, very good. You know, I did not open my email for an entire week. Literally today was the first day I opened up my email. So yeah, I needed that.
How did it feel when you opened the email though?
To be fair, I had been telling people, you know, hey, this is the situation. So it was more of, I'm ready to start. I'm ready to start. Because I had a lot of phone calls in November and December. They wanted to start. So I was literally just getting people started today. So, but I'll say, I think my clients did an awesome job. I think last week being like that Christmas, New Year, it was kind of the perfect timeline with the Mondays. Like, I don't think people wanted to check in. It wasn't like,
No.
Yeah.
I think it was nice to just have that week off of check-ins. And I think, in a way, a Monday Christmas at first kind of sounded not very appealing, but I think you're right. The way everything fell with Christmas being on Monday and then New Year's being on Monday, I don't know, I kind of liked it, but I don't know about you guys. I had absolutely no recollection of what day it was last week. Like it didn't, every day I was like, what day is
That's
it?
the best part. Because there was like no football. There was no like sometimes I know what day it is because I'm like, oh, the Bucks play tomorrow. So I know it's, no, I had no idea. And it's a good feeling. It's a good feeling to have that. So yeah. And you went home, Lexie?
I did. I went to St. Louis for the whole week, and it was nice. I mean, I don't always love going back to St. Louis. Like, not that I don't love seeing my family. I don't love the area. But I was actually able to meet a client in person. I have one client that lives very nearby, so we met up, and yeah, it was nice. I flew back home early on Saturday morning, and let me tell you, the airport, St. Louis airport was, I've never seen it as busy as it was. It was like 4:30 a.m. on Saturday morning, and just the line to like check your bags was like, it was insanely long. I honestly thought maybe I wasn't going to make my flight, but we made it.
Did you get any cold or snow?
No, it wasn't bad. I mean, there were some flurries a couple of days, but the ground is not cold enough for it to stick. It was because it was like right above that freezing point. So we got some flurries, but nothing stuck around. It was tolerable. Even like I was fine the entire time, and that's saying something. Like I never really got too uncomfortable with the cold.
Well, Evan went the opposite direction. Where'd you go, Evan?
A week before Christmas, we went to the Cayman Islands, went with
Yeah.
Danielle and her family down there. It was great. Ate a lot of really good food and relaxed and trained a few times. Actually, met one of the girls that was at the Texas seminar. She lives in the Cayman Islands, and I saw her at
Oh,
the gym
wow.
down there, which was cool. It's a small world down there. And
Yeah, Jan.
yeah, it was fun. And then we got back for like a day and a half and then went up to see her family in Maryland. So for
So you did get to
Christmas.
see some cold. Maryland's nice though.
Yeah, saw some cold. It didn't snow, a little rain, but yeah, it was nice to get away. It was nice to feel some cold weather for a little bit.
Yeah. I'll say this, it felt like a break. I remember last year, Christmas and New Year's did not feel like a break. It was like it was broken up weird. Didn't feel like I actually got refreshed. I was so excited today to get up and like come up to my office and, I very intentionally did not work. I had a couple clients in prep and I said, just text me your updates. So I'm not opening my email because if I open my email and I see something, you just go down that rabbit hole like, oh, I should answer this person. No, I didn't do that. So I'm very excited about like getting this year going, and it feels like that was a good break. And I feel like this topic is a perfect time because I'm already getting a lot of interest, inquiries, questions about this year. And so we're going to talk today about the fastest ways to ruin a prep, the fastest ways to ensure your prep is not as good as it can be, meaning you get on stage and don't hit the mark. You don't look the best you can look. And I think we've all been there as athletes, as coaches, and as friends of people that you're like, man, if you were hit the mark, you would have won this show.
Mhm.
And it's probably not a worse feeling, because if you go to a show and look the absolute best you can look, like Evan at Hurricane, and you don't win, you go, cool, chalk it up to just, I got to be better. But
Yep.
if you go up on stage and you look 75% and there's guys that beat you that they shouldn't have beat you, that's harder to take, in my opinion. You guys agree?
100%. 100%.
Um,
And most of it comes down to conditioning, right? Because it's the one thing we can control in a prep with
well, let's
that.
start
And
there. Let's start there in the idea of conditioning and what determines if you're going to get conditioned enough. So I think, Evan, this was when we talked off air, this was the thing that we first said, that we all kind of just said, like, make sure you give yourself enough time.
yeah,
So
yeah.
why don't you talk about that and how you determine that?
Well, a lot of it's determined. Well, male and female are also different on that time frame, but a lot of time it's your starting point for that. Your starting point, have you competed before? If you're a first time competitor, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to get some of the body fat off. If you're a seasoned competitor, typically you can go a little bit of shorter preps, but most of that's determined by where your starting point is. How successful was your off season? Where's your current body fat percentage at? How's your health? Do you feel like you're in a good spot? Are all those markers good? Like that stuff needs to be right, and then we can get into obviously a prep. But if someone wants to come in and they're 40 pounds overweight, like say as a female, 40 pounds above their stage weight, and like, hey, I want to compete in a show in 20 weeks, it's probably not going to be the best way to go with that. It's going to be tough. Not saying we couldn't do it, but it's
I
definitely not
just
going to
had
be
a
the best look.
client, top level national competitor, at the end of the year say, yeah, I want to do junior USAs or junior nationals. And I was like, you might be ready for USAs. You might be ready for North Americans. There is no way in God's green earth. Like, you're not losing 40 pounds in a few months.
A lot
So
on the body. I feel like a lot of times people like I don't see this as much with like people who have competed before, but like people who want to compete for the first time.
Yeah.
I think that sometimes people lose sight of the fact that prep shouldn't be a huge like weight loss transformation, right? And I think there's a fine line between like you don't want to be too lean, but you obviously don't want to be starting prep from a standpoint where you're going to have to lose, that 30 plus pounds. Like that's just a lot of stress on the body.
30 pounds for a woman is insane. Like, for a guy, me and Evan are both well over 6 foot. 30 pounds is pretty standard.
Yeah.
It's
Easy.
probably a little more than I'd like to lose, but it's not a problem. But if I have a girl that I know is going to be 110, 105 on stage and she's 140, like, there are phases to fat loss that just, you might, that first 10 or 15 might come off, and then you just might hit a wall. Like, it's the end of prep, right? And so
Mm.
you have to really account for that timeline, for as a coach. I mean, this is where I think a lot of our desires to work with people out of prep really, when people say, like, well, I'll reach out to you for prep, and I sometimes go, okay, and I try to give them some guidelines. So let's talk about where you should be to start prep, like, as far as like weight, calories, cardio. Like, do you guys have any like specifics you kind of talk to your individuals about?
Well, ultimately, the calories and the cardio, it all comes down to how much body fat the individual has to lose, right? Because I
100%.
think back to when I started prep in 2021, and I did not start from that high of calories and like that low of cardio. However, I didn't have a ton of weight to drop in total, right? So it
Yeah.
really is going to have to come down to how much weight you have to lose in the prep and how lean you're starting that prep at. So the leaner you are, I would say your macros don't have to be as high. Your cardio doesn't have to be as low. I mean, it's helpful, obviously, but if you have a lot more weight to lose, you're going to be wanting to start your calories as high as you can get them and your cardio as low as it can be, even maybe just a step goal. Because at the end of the day, as coaches, the cardio and the food, those are going to be our two main variables that we have kind of in our coaching toolbox, so to say, to get an individual stage lean.
Yeah, I think the goal should always be for every client to be cardio as low as possible, food as high as possible, while being as lean as possible. If you can marry all those three things, it's great, right? I mean, I have some people I'm working with now that are getting a prep that weights a little bit higher than I would like, but they also are doing zero cardio and their food is very, very high. So at that point with it, we're totally fine. It's not going to be an issue with them. There's some other ones that kind of want to start prep, but they haven't been as disciplined in the off season with it. They'll eat their macros and then kind of go over that, right? And I feel like that's where some people get off track in their off season, especially competitors that get their food higher with it, is they'll eat their food, but when they eat on top of that, that's when a bunch of the calories end up kind of, adding up after that and the body fat gets added on. I like to equate about a week per pound for females. I think that's a good kind of rate to go. So if a female's 20 pounds over stage weight, I'm like, we probably want to do about a 20-week prep. And again, Paul, that's just what you're talking about goes in phases, right? All those 20 weeks won't be dieting because we can't just push down straight for 20 weeks, not with everyone. In a perfect world, great, be linear the whole entire time, right? But if anyone sees video, it's typically like this, right? Like weight loss is. It's never just like this. Be great if it was, but that's not the case for most people.
Yeah, and my favorite part about like doing this for so long now is I've learned that oftentimes when we hit a wall or a plateau where we would typically be like, okay, we got to make some more adjustments, less calories, more cardio. No, that is when I start to apply the diet break strategies
Mhm.
and actually see people lose weight those weeks, which really restores a lot of the off-season kind of metabolic benefits of eating more and doing less and drop some inflammation. And then you start to get confidence. And then all the body changes the closer you get to stage weight. I don't know, it's hard to explain. It doesn't actually make a lot of sense that once you hit your stage condition, you can gradually bring your food up basically to off-season numbers with very minimal cardio and maintain that look as long as you don't overdo it.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that's something that, Dr. Joe and I discussed, gosh, maybe a decade ago. He called it metabolic building when you get to stage weight, but you can also do it mid prep. You don't have to wait till you're stage lean. You can take a recovery week. It's just so beneficial for so many reasons. So yeah, but the problem becomes time, right? So if you're 6 weeks out and you got 12 pounds to lose, telling someone to take a recovery week probably not going to go over too well. You can maybe get them to do 2, 3, 4 days, but if we've got, you know 10 weeks to go, 10 pounds to lose, yeah, let's take a recovery week,
Mhm.
really set you up for that next big push. So time is obviously the most important thing. And with that, we can talk about the rigidity, because all of us agreed before this that one of the fastest ways to ruin a prep was to be super rigid with your schedule. So give me some examples, guys.
Well, one thing I wanted to touch on real quick, Paul, when you were talking about that and the dieting down in the process with it, is
Mhm.
I like to structure deloads too
Yeah.
during like the diet break weeks. While that's kind of opposite, like if we're in a building phase, I actually drop food a little bit during a deload phase because their food is already high, and that
Yeah.
helps their gut recover with that. So it's all about trying to manage the recovery with that on there. But yeah,
Yeah, well,
talking
that's
about the
something. So, for anyone that's listening that's not one of our clients, our update system actually tracks multiple metrics of like overall well-being, like sleep and hunger and stress. So we kind of get a sense during the updates, like, okay, the hunger here is really high, stress is really high, inflammation is probably high. They're not recovering. Okay, maybe they say like, oh, I have a final this week, or I'm closing on my house this week, or my kids have something going on, or we're sick. You can kind of go, okay, this is the time for a recovery week. It's not just simply we're looking at your weights and this and that. It's really understanding where a person's at in the process to make sure that we're making. And this is really only something that comes with experience. My first prep, with Lane, and gosh, was that 2007? None of this stuff existed. There was no such thing. I checked in. He asked what my weight was. If it wasn't down, he cut my calories. And, um, you know, that was my first approach as a coach too. These are things that I've learned over the years. And I think a lot of it came down to noticing that after every time I had a client compete and they did a show a couple weeks later, they just got leaner so much easier. And you go, what was it? Well, peak week, we bring the cardio down, we bring the food up, they get the recovery, they go out, they have a free meal, their hormones and digestion kind of gets back to a little bit of normal, and then they go back to their prep. Lo and behold, it's like pulling a slingshot. You're like,
Yep.
you're setting them up. And then it occurred to me, like, why are we waiting until the end of prep to do this? Why are we not taking peak weeks out from the show if it's making us better? And that's like one of my favorite strategies. I'll always say this: my clients' third or second or fourth show will always be their best look of the year. They'll always look better and better and better. So yeah, it's a learned behavior, but I think it can be hard mentally on a competitor. So you have to
It
have
is.
buy-in, because
Yeah.
even you, Evan,
That's where the
when you
trust comes
probably needed
into.
some
Yeah.
recovery last year, you just wanted to keep grinding.
Towards the end. Yeah. Yeah.
I had to convince you to have a burger. I remember you were like, I was like, what have you been eating? You're like, no fat, no this. No, I'm like, no, you might just need something, and like, when you're in it, dude, you want to be like, I did everything in my power. And
Mhm.
sometimes you feel like that means go harder. And sometimes it means the opposite. It means just take your foot off the gas for a couple days and just let the body catch up.
Yep,
Yeah.
that is 100% the hardest part mentally when you get deeper into prep is thinking that you need to push when really you need to pull. And I think
Mhm.
like that is why as a coach, I don't think I could ever prep myself because we all get into that like, like you said Paul, that like deep grind and prep where you just want to push and you can't see clearly and you can't really think clearly. And so having a, an outsider perspective to be able to tell you to pull back can be really valuable.
Mhm.
Yep.
Well,
I mean,
we were
that's
going on.
literally, there's different phases of a coach. I say this, I've had some clients for now 7, 8 years, and I'll say there's different phases of coaching, right? You start off like, okay, coach, can I have this? What should I have for my pre-workout meal? How many, what does my form look like? After a couple of years, it shifts and it's much more about, understanding where the person is at. I'm not having to explain the same principles, but now it's more like, I always call it fine tuning the Ferrari. Um, Daraja could do her own prep at this point. She does not need me to explain to her what her nutrition, her cardio, her training should look like. But our teamwork is more based around, okay, let's look at the whole structure of prep. When are we going to push? When are we going to pull back? When do we need to take some recovery? So then it becomes more of you know, a collaboration than it is like,
Mhm.
hey, this is how prep is going to be. Nobody knows the body as good as the person living in it, right? So getting feedback from an athlete is huge, huge.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I just had this discussion with a client this past week. We've worked together for a while and it's her body definitely responds very differently than like the normal person does and it's been really cool. We've worked together for so long where we've been able to collaborate. She gives me her feedback. I kind of, try different things and we see how she responds and now we've finally gotten to this place where even though it's taken a while, like we know how her body responds and how it's a little different, but it's cool to learn that over time and then eventually to be able to just kind of smooth sail because you both have collaborated and learned the body so well.
That's it. That's it. I mean, that I think that's the hardest part of coaching is understanding that you don't know everything and keeping an open mind. Because the one thing I run into when I talk to competitors that work with other coaches is a lot of them are just very ego driven and like, I'm the best and this is how it's done. And
Mhm.
no, like that it should never be that pragmatic. It should not be the same approach for everybody, um, being open-minded and listening to an athlete and going, okay, well, what works best for you? If I've got
Mhm.
like night shift nurses, that literally work around the clock for 4 days and then they have 3 days off. Well, why would I require them to do cardio and they don't get to sleep for 4 days? I'll just have them do cardio on the days that they're off, even if it's
Mhm.
longer or 2 sessions, right? So, learning to work that has really allowed, I think, the idea of getting on stage to fit people's lifestyles better. So,
Yeah.
um,
A- And I think that's smart. Well, like the seasons of coaching, right? And there's the longer you've been with the client, the more they understand. I think it can. It's obviously having trust in that client that what they're telling you is correct and that they
yeah,
understand their body. I feel like some people think they understand their body when they kind of don't, especially earlier on in their competing career with it. But making sure that client feels heard, making sure that you take their questions and their ideas about how they think things should go into account is incredibly important. But
yeah,
when you have a client that has been doing preps, I started working with a few people this year that have self-coached themselves for years and they've done well, and they want to take the next step and work with a coach. They've done well. So I'm going to listen to what they've done to get to that point,
Yeah.
right? It'd be stupid and the hubris of me to be like, no, this is the way things have to be done. It's just dumb because that gets out a lot of the work of me having to learn their body because they're already telling me how their body works. So why would I discount that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that, I think that's the greatest value is like as a coach, you can learn from your clients. I mean, there's things that
Hmm.
I've learned from clients that I apply to other clients. I'll have a situation where my client, will say, this is what's happening to me. And I'll be like, oh, well, I spoke to this person that had that same job in the same situation, and this is what worked for them. So yeah,
Hmm.
that's where like the art of coaching comes in. Otherwise we'd all just be an app, right? Like
Yeah,
this is a very mental as well as physical sport. And so having that balance of understanding is huge. Um, I did want to talk a little bit about,
would you?
Evan, you brought up before we got on the call, understanding how much body fat we have, right? So part of that does lie with the timeline of prep,
Hmm.
like understanding, um, there was a famous, it's not famous amongst our circle, but when I first got into the sport 15 years ago, there was a famous quote by Brian Whitaker, who, if you're not familiar with Brian Whitaker, just Google him. He was multi-time world champion, natural bodybuilder. He was basically the gold standard for conditioning and natural bodybuilding. Everybody knew who Brian Whitaker was. And when someone asked him, like, how do you know when you're stage lean? He basically said, get to where you're stage lean and lose 10 more pounds, and you're probably getting close. And I
Hmm.
I think
think,
I've heard you say that before. Yeah.
yeah. And we always give Brian credit because, like it's so true. Like I remember my first prep, me and Lane talked. He said, this will be my weight. Nope. I was 10 pounds below that when I actually was stage lean. Right. So, um, it's a number that you're going to be uncomfortable with. I don't care how big,
Every time.
tall, it's a number that you're going to hear, or you're going to think there's no effing way. How many times, guys, raise your hands when you hear this? I haven't weighed this much since high school.
Oh, all the
All
time.
the time.
Or people will ask, like, at the beginning of their prep, hey, do you have any idea, like, especially when they're ordering their suit for bikini competitors, like, what do you think my stage weight is going to be around? And you tell them, and especially if they're a first time competitor, you can kind of hear that, like, that initial, like, panic. And, I always have to explain it. Like, I know that sounds very low, but I think a lot of first timers or new competitors who truly have never gotten lean enough, they underestimate how lean you need to be. And that's why I always recommend, and I know you guys do this too, if you want to compete, before you ever jump into a prep, go to a show first, watch it, see what competitors look like in real life, not just on social media, because that gives you a true, perception of how lean you truly do need to be.
I
Yeah.
always say newer competitors in almost every situation overestimate the amount of muscle they have and underestimate how much body fat they have in
Yeah.
almost
Yeah.
every situation. They think they have way more muscle than they do. And a lot of times I hear it too, and I just kind of roll my eyes at it. My coach dieted away all my muscle. Well, you really didn't have that much to begin with. You really did.
It is.
Now, there's some times that things get aggressive and people do over diet themselves, right?
Yeah.
But that's
Muscle's hard to
normally,
lose.
yeah.
Muscles, people think you can just lose muscle. No, you're probably losing muscle fullness, like if you're not getting enough carbs and sodium
Hmm.
and stuff like that. But the muscle's still there. If you're training and eating protein, you're not really going to lose a whole lot of muscle unless you're just being absolutely moronic.
Yeah.
But
Unless you're
what you
just
can
not
do,
eating.
yeah, or you can look terrible on show day because you dehydrated. Guys, muscle is 70-80% water. If you're taking diuretics, your muscles are not going to be as full on stage, right? If you are pulling sodium and carbs, your muscles are not going to be full on stage. So, um, but that's something we could talk about with the peaking episode, which we may have done already. But the idea of, and this is another great thing about being ready early for a show, at this point in my career, I am now coaching what I consider to be the top athletes in the world. I can't put them on stage without having tested their peaking plan, right? To the point where a mock peak week, when you're ahead of schedule, really helps you just with the confidence and looking great on stage, knowing if you're lean enough, if you're full enough. That only happens if you get the body fat off ahead of schedule.
Hmm.
I've had girls, and I had a girl this year at nationals that I didn't want her to do the show because I knew she wasn't lean enough. We tried a different approach to peaking where, we dehydrated her a little bit, just to get her to look a little bit tighter because she was a little bit overly muscular. It's not it. That's not the look. She's not lean enough. She didn't listen. She got on stage, didn't do well. And she, we set the expectation, so she wasn't too let down. But my point is like, you've got to give yourself time to get that body fat off. Like, and
Hmm.
certain divisions, Men are a little harder to judge, right? Because there's so much variability in the muscularity of men, but women, within a few pounds where you should be basically based on your height. There's just so much data, at least in my experience.
Yeah, I always
And
think
Paul,
it's
that
better
kind of
for a little bit more time than you think you need. Because I mean, worst case scenario, you're ready a little early for a show and you can feed into the show. So I feel like it's always better to kind of bargain to have more time to prep than you think you need.
Yeah.
and that kind of rolls into the next point we're talking about, Paul, about being a rigid schedule,
Yeah.
right? On that, the goal should be, to me, the way I look at people in a prep, if I think we need 16 weeks, we're going to prep for 20.
Mhm.
That's the way I
Yeah.
look at it. Like,
Yeah.
if we need a 4 week buffer, we need to be ready early, because I think a big misconception that people have is I like to typically get more aggressive early when it comes to food and prep and push the weight down quicker. And people worry about that. I'm like, well, no, like if this is a 16-week prep, right now we're at 12 weeks is the way I
Right.
look at it. And then we reverse you into the show. So we're feeding you, because like you said, Paul, the way you look bad on stage, if you're lean enough, is if you're not hydrated and your glycogen's empty, right? We want to get you lean, then fill you up, like deflate then inflate that balloon with it. And we can't do that if we crash land into a show. And we can't do that if someone is hell bent on doing a show and they're not ready in time for that show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's a problem there. Sometimes the timeline is fixed. Like if you're trying to get qualified for a pro card or an Olympia, or, I know you have a top natural pro competitor, those shows are kind of locked in. So if it's your first show or you're just trying, yeah, you can be a little more flexible, but there are certain timelines where they just are what they are. We know the date of the
Mhm.
Olympia, right?
Yeah.
Then
I
we need to
know
make
when
sure we're
I have
ready
my
for that
girls getting
Olympia.
ready for, I'm not going to be like, let's skip the Olympia. Let's just do the Atlantic Coast Pro a couple weeks later. No, there's certain things you are doing as a competitor. But that's where even being ready ahead of schedule matters more. But I will say, like, the higher you go up the competition kind of stratosphere,
Mhm.
those competitors are so seasoned. You don't see Chris Bumstead missing on condition. You don't see
No.
Nick Walker missing on conditioning. Those guys, and same thing with the top female competitors, they have worked it out where they need to be by
Hmm.
that point in their career. If you're new
And
to
they
the
know.
sport, don't be so rigid. If you're 4 weeks out from the Sioux Falls show and you're like, man, I find another one. You know what the great thing about the NPC is? Good grief, there are a lot of shows. There is a show,
Those.
there's 10 shows every weekend across the country or more. Like
Yep.
Florida has over 40 shows alone, and there's only 52 weeks in a year. And how many of those aren't even prep weeks? January, February, so there's a show basically every week in Florida, California, Texas, these bigger areas. So
I think
And
sometimes what happens too is I hear this a lot from girls where they'll almost feel like they've failed if they are okay 4 weeks out from that show that they wanted to do, and if they decide, oh, let's, if we have to decide, oh, let's push back your show. I think some people feel like they failed when really we know that's not the case. But I think it's important to know that happens more than a lot of
well, I'll
people.
tell you why they fail if that's the case. Because and if she's listening, I'm not going to say her name because I don't want to call her out, but she's going to know I'm talking about her. I had a girl, we were prepping for her pro debut, and we kept pushing back the date because I'm like, listen, there's no point getting on stage for your pro debut if you couldn't even win the NPC show. We've got to be amazing, and that still means nothing at the pro level. You're still not even guaranteed a first call out. But she had told people this was going to be my pro debut. She had told her friends, her family, probably her followers. She had talked about it so much that she had placed the expectation, and she felt like she was letting all those people down. So that's a lesson you can use as well, as like, don't place too much pressure on yourself by like being
Ab-
too vocal until you're sure. You even see
yeah.
some girls nowadays, they don't even say they're in prep, and then, by the way, I did a show. I can tell you that's what I did last year, and guess what? I felt totally relaxed. I felt no
Mhm.
pressure. Right? You don't have that sense of like, oh, everyone's waiting to see what I do.
Yeah, that's a
And
great point. Yeah, I think that is why you see that kind of sense of failure that people feel a lot. But I always like to approach it in the way of I always like to ask like my competitors, if we're going to start prep, what, if there are a few shows that they're kind of gung ho on wanting to do or wanting to try to aim for, but I always like to have a couple within a time frame. That way,
yep.
The first one, if we know 6 weeks out from the first one, probably not going to be quite there, then we have that next show to fall back on. I think it's really important to have a plan B, a plan C, potentially a plan D, just so you have a little bit of wiggle room. And, if you're just gung ho on one show and you're not ready for it, well, then it is going to feel like it is the end of the world.
Yep. And one of my big pet peeves, and I'm brainstorming here about document I'm going to actually put together to send out when everyone starts prep, is don't register for the show like 16 weeks out.
I
You
have
can
never
book your
heard.
plane flight if it's refundable. You can book your hotel because that's cancelable. That stuff's fine. But when I hear people, we'll be like 4 weeks, 5 weeks after the show, I'm like, I don't think we should do the show. It's like, well, I've already paid for the hotel. I've already paid for this. I've already prepaid. I've already done. I'm like, why? Well, because I needed that goal. And I can understand the mental part of it saying, hey, I'm locked in. I'm guaranteed no matter what. But the body doesn't care. It doesn't care that you made a commitment to that. And
Well, it doesn't
sometimes
care.
we
And
need a little
honestly,
more
you can
time.
make it worse because now
Yeah.
you're creating the stress because of that date. And you wake up in the morning and you look in the mirror and you look at the scale and you go, I'm not making progress. And that date's approaching. And that can actually keep you up at
Mm-hmm.
night. You can wake up and be like, oh my gosh, I know it's 2 in the morning, but I can't wait to see what the scale says. Am I on track? You can actually start to, whereas if you just sleep in and go, oh, and I think, didn't you do that a bit, Evan, this year? You had multiple like dates that you were going to compete, and then you didn't compete until the one you were ready for.
Yeah, I mean, look, I was ready enough to where if I would have pushed, I could have done like Daytona. I could have done some shows if I wanted to push earlier
Right.
for it. But I had other commitments, I had other things going, and I made sure that I had the hurricane date that I knew no matter what I could be ready for. I could be ready 6 weeks earlier for that show if I needed to be ready, or 6 weeks earlier for that show. But I was also trying some different things too, right? Like doing no cardio, pushing my food lower. Like I was trying some different things that I've always wanted to be able to do
Yeah.
with that on there. But yeah, there was that. There was a Fort Lauderdale show. I was like, if this doesn't work out for this, say I know I could be ready 6 weeks earlier, but say something happens and this doesn't go, that's fine. There's other shows I can do. It's not the end of the world. It's
Right.
totally okay. It's always good. And I tell people, especially when we're picking out shows, all right, here's our game plan. Here's our show. We're going to work towards this, but what's our backup plan?
Yeah.
Because
Yes.
we always want a backup plan. And people look at that like, hey, burn the boats, get out there. There is no backup plan. That's just
Burn the
dumb.
boats.
It's
Yeah.
Well,
dumb.
I mean,
Like you
listen, I
need to have a plan. It's good to be motivated to go all in, but that's not always going to be the case. It's not reality. Things can happen. Life can happen. You need to have a
yeah,
backup plan if you have big goals, at least.
yeah, yeah. It is, and it is very freeing when you actually tell yourself, you know what? I'm going to give myself a couple more weeks. It's like a really good feeling. Like you just go, oh man. I've even had some competitors because, you know, as a coach, I'm very empathetic. I try to get into their heads and know what they're thinking and feeling. And sometimes I don't want to be like, hey, we're not going to be ready for the show. But fuck that. I'm at the point now in my coaching career where I'm like, I'm going to tell them how it is. It's there. I'm going to give them the information. I'm going to say, listen, you're not going to be at your best at this show. You could still win because you're a good competitor. But if someone shows up and beats you because they're at their best, that's a possibility. Do you want to do the show? What are my options? And I'll even go, Google NPC California. I'll be like, hey, look, there's a show in Tahoe in 3 more weeks. Give us 3 more weeks. Oh, that's actually cool. I have a friend that lives in Tahoe. Yeah, I love this idea. Or no, my mom's coming in, my mama's coming in, like these things are happening. I'm doing the show. Cool. Now I have the information. I'm not making decisions based on what would be ideal, but what I'm given to dealt with as a coach. And then sometimes I can go, okay, well, if that's the case, how do you feel about just going crazy for a couple days? I call it Hell Week. And
Mhm.
they'll always be like, let's do it. Right. So and this is where again experience really helps because so many times I would have competitors just tell me like, coach, after prep, I wish you would have just told me I wasn't quite ready enough. And you hear that a couple times and then you start to do it. And now I do that and it just definitely goes much better.
Yeah.
It's a much better conversation.
It
Well, you
is. And
want them to be able to make an informed decision. And to make an
Yeah.
informed decision, you need proper information and you need to have another backup, right? Like other options for things. Because you can't really make an informed decision if that's the only option you have, then the data really doesn't matter because it's the only option you have. So you need other options and you need the proper information to be able to make that informed decision. What you're doing, Paul, is giving them that information, right? Letting them know, hey, this is the way I see it going here. I've done this a long time. Choice
Yeah.
is up to you, but here's the date.
Well, and I mean, if it comes, even sometimes I've been like, listen, I know you paid for 6 months and this is another month. I'll coach you for free for the last month because, I want it to go the way it needs to go. I'd rather you get on stage, at the right way. Um, I just,
Mhm.
that option, if you can make it possible, it will always end up better.
Yep.
Always give yourself time.
Percent. And I think another thing to kind of segue in and talk about real briefly that we had brainstormed before we started this episode would be finances before starting prep. I know this is not a topic a lot of people like to talk openly about, but I know we've all seen it before where a girl will be a couple weeks out from their show and realize, oh, wow, this is a lot of money to buy my flights or to pay for the show and the makeup and the tan. I can't afford it. So I need to drop out. And like, I hate seeing somebody work so hard for a set amount of time to have to drop out of a show because of finances, right? So I think it is really important before you get into prep to, to kind of write out what you're going to have to pay for and plan for it. That way there's no surprises. It's not an added stressor on your plate because if you're, stressing 4 or 5 weeks out about how am I going to pay for this, the body is probably not going to respond favorably either. You're going to hold on to some water just from that elevated cortisol. So I think it really is important to consider where you're at financially before you start prep, plan everything out. Just that way, everything's covered and it's not an added stressor.
100%. Yeah, you gotta understand the cost of these shows is pretty substantial, especially if you're talking about going to a national show where you're gonna have to travel, get a hotel. Most girls at this point are getting the makeup artists, which are, 250 in excess. Entry fee at nationals this year, I believe, was 375 per class. So you're at $600. You haven't even traveled yet, right? You haven't.
That's
So
before tan. Yeah.
yeah, or
It's
tanned. I will say I'm having more and more girls do the DIY tan, and then we buy the tan as a backup. That's if it's not going on well, I'll be like, okay, well, let's just pay for the tan. But the DIY is quite cheap and less stressful. But even that, you still got to pay for that. You still got to afford it and get some help with it. But the real substantial money, the higher you go up in the sport, every little thing that you can do to save a couple bucks, um, I'd be curious to know. Message me if you're interested in this. If like a self stage makeup tutorial would be beneficial, because what I'll do is I'll pay a makeup artist to do one for our team, and we can post it on our studio page. Because one of my favorite things is my competitors that do their own makeup, because the
something
stress of
stressful.
that 4 a.m. appointment is something that I'm like, you have an appointment at 4 a.m. and you're not going on stage till 2 p.m.
Yeah,
Okay.
I've been there before. I had a 3 a.m. one time, but granted, that was because I jumped into the show like
Yeah.
3 before. But you're right, it can be very stressful if you have a really, really early makeup time. I personally love this has just always been me. Even like in high school when I would have school dances, I loved getting my makeup professionally done. It's
Yeah.
just like my little thing. But so it's not like the getting it done that stresses me out. But you're right, if you get a really sucky time and you're having to get up at 3 a.m., I mean, yeah, that's not fun.
And when sleep is important
Mhm.
and schedule is important, and you throw off everything to get up at 3 a.m., it's not, it's just, it's more variables that we don't want to have to deal with
And
too
listen,
as a
everyone
coach.
listening here, it's going to happen to you. Like if
It,
you want to work with the best makeup artists,
It's
I
going to be
mean,
early.
they're going to be, especially if you're at a pro am. Sorry, those pros are getting the good times.
oh yeah,
Um,
and that's why they ask too. Like when you pay for your makeup, they'll typically ask. I at least know the makeup artist I go through always asks like, "What's your class?" And that's kind of how
yeah.
they write out the schedule to make sure the girls who are going to go on first get those early time slots. Um, but yeah, the makeup it can be stressful. I know I had a client who competed this past year. I was with her in San Antonio, and she had a really bad makeup time, like 3 a.m. And I told her, I said, "Come back to the room." And like not sleep on the side of your face, but lay down and just try to sleep for another hour. Because what are you gonna do if you're up at 3:30 and you don't go on stage for a while? Like, what are you gonna do at that point? Just sit there and twiddle your
Well,
thumbs?
there's also the other side of the equation. You could have a noon makeup appointment and then you hear the show is running fast and you're like, oh crap. Now the cortisol starts dumping for that reason. So, you know,
Mhm.
I'd rather have the super early one than the super close to stage one. But yeah, that's honestly where another benefit of being a coach because I was at nationals and I had 13 girls there, and I had a girl that had makeup at like noon. And granted, she was in like one of the taller height classes. So I just said, hey, I'll just let you know when the bikini starts because it's, it's going to be 30, 40 minutes per class between all the call outs and the routines. And then she was nervous all day, but they hadn't even started bikini A by the time her appointment started. So she was fine. She had like hours to spare. But, it's very, show day can be very fluid. Sometimes you go to a show and you expect it to take long, and they're like, all right, we're lining up bikini A. And you're like, well, what about this? Oh, we moved wellness till after bikini. You're like, you did what? Right. So some things can happen. So, all right.
Absolutely.
So that was a lot about the rigidity. Now let's get into some other issues. Rigidity, finances. I want to kind of end on nutrition and training stuff, but this will be a coaching pet peeve, and maybe it's a personality thing, but we said it off camera. We said too many cooks in the kitchen. What do I mean by that? You hire a coach. You're following the coach's plan. You see a post on the internet that says, my coach had me take this diuretic, or my coach had me eat this carb, or my coach says these foods are bad for you. And then you start going down the rabbit hole. And then maybe you even ask that person a question. Hey, my coach has me doing this. Don't do that.
Don't do that, no. And and I see this a lot. I don't think you guys are in this group. There is a big Facebook group, a big bodybuilding group. I Somebody invited me into it a while ago, but there are so many people that will post like anonymously, and they'll be like, hey, here's my protocol, blah blah blah. My coach has me doing this. What do you guys think? And I'm like, why would you open up that can of worms? Because you're just you're putting yourself in a spot where you're going to get so many differing opinions, and you're going to feel so like scatterbrained and more confused than ever. So I think it's really important when you hire your coach, realize you hire your coach. I mean, hopefully you hire a coach that you trust 100%, and you can kind of shut out what everybody else says in the prep. It's just kind of a matter of you and that coach, and maybe that posing coach, that are working together throughout your prep, not all the other Facebook opinions or coaches who are throwing out their opinions on Instagram. Like, the too many cooks in the kitchen can just get so overwhelming.
And I have a suggestion too for people. Like, luckily, people that work with us or have good experiences, right? Like, we care about their health, we care about their performance, we care about the mental well-being. That's not always the case, right? We did a whole video on red flags, and I think I've already had 3 consultations this week with people that have had coaches that didn't do the things correctly, right? Or didn't have the athlete's best interest in mind. If you have worries about that, of course, address them with your coach. And then I suggest reaching out to some other athletes that that coach has coached and ask them on there, rather than just asking a random person that has no affiliation with that coach or done anything with that coach or anything like that. Um, I always tell my clients, if you have an issue, please just ask me and we can
Yeah.
talk about it. There's a lot of coaches out there that don't. It's like, hey, this is just my way, do it my way. That's a big red flag to begin with, that they're not going to discuss any of that stuff with you. But if that's the case and you can't discuss it with that coach, but you're already middle of prep and you don't want to make a switch with it, then ask some other people that that person has coached. That's a better outlet than just going on Reddit or going on Facebook or putting out a random comment that people don't know anything about your situation or that coach at all. That'd be my suggestion.
I
Well,
see
and
it.
if you have an issue and you feel like you can't ask your coach, that's a
It's a
problem.
problem. Yeah.
Like, listen, I'm not suggesting my clients should just ignore everybody in the whole world and just listen to my content. If you have a question, if someone's like, oh, well, this coach says that, we should be using a glucose monitor all prep. I'm like, well, I don't really agree with that philosophy. If you're a healthy person, you don't need a glucose monitor. Okay.
Out
Thank
of
you for
prep.
asking me though. Whereas like, it can seem like, oh man, this coach knows something my coach doesn't know because they're using a glucose monitor. Glucose should rise and fall. That's a healthy part of a human being, right? Insulin is good. It's not bad. It's just a hormone that our body uses to transport fucking nutrients. So like, but I think that's where a lot of these coaches get into people's DMs, and they try to make posts that make them seem like they're doing something next level that maybe their coach isn't doing. And then that's how they try to get clients,
Mhm.
which is,
That's a great point. Yeah, because I do feel like that is part of why so many people post about those like technical nitty gritty things. And I mean, I think there's something to be said for that can serve its time and place, but the minimum effective dose with the protocol is always going to be best. Like not just adding a ton of fluff, so to say, just because it sounds cool, you
Well,
know?
I mean, you can actually like, because I've had some people come to me and be like, well, my last coach wanted all this information. Do you want all this information? And I was like, whoa, dude, how long does that take you to complete? That's stress, right? So I'm thinking like, what information do I actually need to make informed decisions? There's
Hmm.
some things I don't need to know. I don't need to know your daily sodium intake. Just give me your average. I don't need to know your, what I'm saying? Like there is information overload. And I think that comes down to personality. Some people love to
Mhm.
track everything. Some people that would cause them a great deal of stress. If someone wants to track everything, I have an Excel spreadsheet. Here you go. Plug it all in. But I'm not looking at that and going, okay, I'm making all my decisions. Okay, why was your sodium 80 milligrams higher yesterday? What's going like that? No, like there's a
But
normal,
jump off a building.
Mhm.
yeah.
You're
And
so right.
also daily
Down to
changes.
earth.
Like that's why, our system tracks the average weight of the week along with the daily weights. So we can look and go, well, you checked in today and your weight is up a pound, but you're actually down a pound and a half on average this week. But if I just looked at the weight today, I would have been like, oh no. So like, you know, there's a right way and a wrong way. We're still trying to figure that out. But I think processing too much information can actually be damaging to the athlete. When I have a client start going down that rabbit hole, coach, should I start doing this? Should I start? I go, whoa, why are you asking me these questions? You've been with me for a couple of years. You've never asked these questions. Oh, well, I saw this person on YouTube talking about it. I go, okay. I go, listen, respectfully, how's my resume look? Cool. Do I not address everything? Yeah, cool. We don't need to be we don't need to be doing these things. You don't need to be doing these things that sound great and technical, but in the grand scheme of things, go look at this person's clients and tell me what they're doing, right? So,
Mhm.
yeah, it's so yeah.
Good points. Yeah. Do you want to dive into the protocol stuff now?
Yeah, I think that's probably where a lot of the nuance is, right? We've talked about flexibility, we've talked about finances, um,
Do you want to touch on
setting
expectations?
expectations. Before we get too much into the nutrition and training, let's just talk about my kind of non-negotiables for prep, and athlete, and stress. Okay. There are three situations where I really, really suggest people do not try to prep. Weddings. Now, I'm not saying never. I'm saying I really, really, weddings, change of a relationship status, divorce, things like that. Moving, like a serious move, job change.
Mm.
Those events are so big picture that sometimes athletes will be like, well, I'm going to prep through it and prove I can do it. And sometimes they'll even have a great prep and they'll succeed. But almost every time afterwards, they're like, yeah, I shouldn't have done that. I should have separated the two, right? Um, Not saying you can't be successful. I mean, Daraja got fourth in the world at the Olympia the year she got married. She still says it was probably a dumb choice, right? She's been pretty open about that. But you can't move the Olympia and you can't move your wedding date. So, and she tried to set her wedding date actually up right in the perfect time frame. So it actually worked out. But my point being is like I've had a lot of people be like, Coach, I know we're 12 weeks out, but me and my husband are getting divorced. But I want to prep anyway. And then the move happens, and then the life change happens, and then they get on stage and they're like, yeah, they were almost prepping out of spite. Have you guys dealt with some of that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, prepping out of spite or just prepping to kind of shut out everything else that they have to deal with like they think it's going to be a way to just shut it all out, but eventually they're going to have to deal with it. I also think another thing too would be on the topic or the list of events would be like big trips or vacations too. I
Mhm.
try to set it up so that like a client isn't going to be deep into a prep if they're going on some lavish trip or vacation. I mean, they can do that, but they're going to have to know, okay, if they're 4 weeks out from their show and they have a big old, trip and vacation, they're probably not going to be able to go on that trip and eat whatever they want. Like they're going to have to still stay pretty regimented. And some people are okay with that, but a lot of people plan big vacations so they can relax a little bit. So I think it's important to think about that too when you are setting your timeline up for your shows.
And I think that also depends on the type of person it is too. Some people go on vacations to eat just a bunch of junk, right? Other people, like in the vacation we went on, we ate a lot of food, but it was all like good, high quality, and wasn't overly calorie dense food, right? So I came back the same weight that I left, and I ate a lot though. But it was the food choices I made were still good with that. You have other people that just want to go just eat junk all day long and sit around do nothing on vacation. If that's you, that's probably not a thing you want to
Yeah.
do in prep.
Your idea of vacation is 2 bottles of tequila by the pool while you just eat, burgers and chips all day. Listen, not
Sounds
hating
good.
on it, but that's not going to fit prep. But yeah, I've actually had Lexi, like the reason I didn't bring up the vacation one is because I use that as an opportunity for a diet break. And I
Yeah.
usually have clients come back and they're like, oh man, I'm actually the same weight or down because lo and behold, if you don't train your ass off, your hunger signals drop. If you're not doing tons of cardio, your hunger signal might drop. You're sleeping in, your hunger might drop. You don't have the stress of work, maybe your kids around, your hunger. So you might actually benefit from that, depending on what the vacation is. And most people, when they go on vacation, their stress drops, right? They're either getting better sleep, or they're a lot of times they'll be like, well, what do I do on my vacation to stay in shape? I go, what's the trip? Oh, I'm going to Europe. What are you doing all day? Sightseeing. I go, you're fine. You're going to walk 20,000 steps a day, just walking around London. You don't have to worry about
Mhm.
nothing. Um, so I think a lot of it is me understanding that situation. But my concern is always just, is sometimes, as much as I'm an optimist about an athlete, I've just seen it so many times that someone like is going through a really tough time in their life and they're using prep almost as a coping mechanism. And I'm not going to tell them no, right? I'm not going to say that. I'm just going to say, like, in my experience, this is going to be more difficult, but it might actually be the best thing for them, because you might be going through a tough time and then you might go down a rabbit hole if you don't prep, right? You might just, like, your negativity might take over. So it's kind of a mixed decision, but I would prefer, and you can't always control this, but let's at least try to not be as stressed as possible, depending on your show date. Try to make that at least a good timeline. Um, so now let's talk a little bit about nutrition. Let's start with nutrition, and then we'll get into, so nutrition and cardio will be bulked together, and then we'll talk about training. Um, so nutrition practices. I've been pretty adamant over my coaching career that no carb, no fat is absolutely moronic. And if your coach has you on a plan and you don't know what it is, and you're on a meal plan, you plug it in and you're on 10 grams of fat and 30 grams of carbs and 200 grams of protein and you weigh 150 pounds, you are going to damage some things, right? Um, so I don't know if you want to call that, like, I don't like the word cookie cutter for this, because you can have a good cookie cutter plan. You can have a good meal plan, but this would be more like, I don't know, old school, like, what do you guys call this when someone's on like too much protein and not enough anything else?
Bodybuilder keto.
Yeah, old
Yeah,
That's what I call
school.
it.
I don't know. I just, yeah, I think of that as like the old school bro approach.
yeah, yeah, like trace fats, trace carbs, maybe like a couple vegetables, but then it's like chicken and fish all day.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And they're like,
yeah,
those are the same plans that are like, no fruit, fruit is bad for you. Or they're like, have a handful of this, or like, a cup of this, like the weird kind of volumetric measurements, or the handfuls of, like, I see that in meal plans sometimes. And I'm like, what?
yeah, I'm gonna call up Shaq and be like, Shaq, let me see what a handful of almonds looks like for you.
Right. Or like three stalks of asparagus. It's like, well, there's a pretty big difference in size there. So yeah, I look at that as like the old school bro
Well,
approach.
so the ones that I've seen from the coaches that I despise are very detailed. They look fancy. They'll be like 5 or 6 meals, but it'll be like 3 ounces chicken or fish,
2 ounces
four
green beans.
almonds, 3 asparagus spears at 7 a.m. At 9:30 a.m., 1 scoop of BCAAs, and it's like this. It looks like it's very specific. Like, wow, this has been really put together. The problem is it wasn't. It's just been copied and pasted. But it's
Yeah.
also problematic because, like you said, if you want to talk about the fastest way to ruin your physique, lose muscle, damage hormones, yeah, let's pull out all the fats and carbs of the body and just start having these negative impacts on all of our hormonal systems that are making our bodies function properly.
Mhm.
Um, food variability is also going to determine our success after a show. If you have that type of a plan for too long, you're going to develop eating disorder behaviors. Now, I'll say this, some of the coaches that I despise get great results, but the results are because they're great athletes that are sticking to a plan that's very rigid for a long time. But you'll also see these athletes just disappear. And I'm not talking about like for a month. I'm talking about for years. They will literally do shows, get peeled, and they'll be way off stage condition for multiple years before they can ever get back.
I see that
Yeah,
all the
because
time. More so the repercussions of the post-show side of things on these like crazy, and unideal meal plans. They work while, they're following them and they work up until show day and they usually look good, but then it's the aftermath that usually is just bad. Those are usually the same girls that struggle with the binging or just a ton of like gut issues because they've eaten the same 5 foods for the past 5 months. And I just see the post show being very negative over anything with those very rigid meal plans.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I even feel like, I think we all see this too. Sometimes those like protein only, no fat, no carb diets, like deep into prep, those are also the people that are struggling with not going to the bathroom and struggling with just some weird, wonky digestion. So,
yeah, and
yeah.
I'm not even going to say they work. We hear about, and you see the ones on stage that look good. Sometimes that's what they did that work. It's like gamblers. You hear about the times they win. You don't hear about all the times they lose. I can't tell you
Right.
how many clients I've taken over that have very similar diets to that did not look remotely okay on stage with it.
Oh no,
It
I'm
works
not
if you're a
suggesting that
great
those
athlete.
plans
Oh yeah.
work for everybody. I'm saying
If
that's
you're a
the
great
example.
athlete with
That's
great
the example that
metabolism,
that coach will use. Shut up. This
yeah.
is what so and so does, or you know, yeah. So
So
I almost get worried when clients are too flexible because I do believe in meal plans. Like I'm not trying to say like you shouldn't be on a meal plan. You absolutely must be on a meal plan to be
you just
successful
make
in
it.
contest prep.
Mhm.
But it's the mental idea of this is the only 6 foods, 7 foods that you can eat all
Mhm.
prep. Promise you that's not the case. You can eat just about anything. You can make it fit. The bulk of your prep should be based around these whole foods with great nutrients that fit your kind of taste buds and your morals and all that. But by no means is somehow tilapia better for you than any other protein source. Um,
Worse in most
yeah, it could be worse
cases.
depending on like where you're getting your tilapia from. But um, and I'm not saying tilapia is bad. Some people love it, and it's an easy prep food. Like you can throw it in the oven and it's good to go. Um, but yeah, the as coaches, when we do our consultations, that's the thing I struggle with because what's going to happen and inevitably, and I'm going to be there for them. I'm not saying I won't answer the call, but I'm going to get some calls in February, March, April. Someone's going to start with a coach. They're going to be like, yeah, I heard your podcast. That's exactly what I was doing. I was doing 2 hours of stairs. I was doing all these drugs, anti-estrogens and, all these things. And then this crazy diet. And now I'm binge eating. I'm unable to make any progress. I'm not sleeping. I'm shaking, like just
Yeah.
crazy things that are completely unnecessary. And I think for many years, it was just accepted that that's prep, right? I made a video like 6, 7 years ago because I had a girl win an overall at a show. And after the show, one of the girls came up to me and was like, I don't understand how your girl won. She's not on the prep diet. I go, what do you mean? She's like, well, I talked to her backstage. She's not on the prep diet. I go, what is the prep diet? She's like, isn't this what everyone does? And she showed me her meal plan. I go, no,
Ugh.
that's not that
Yeah.
like some people just accept that that's prep. Like you're going to hate life. And I'm like, no, like that's incorrect. Where'd you get this from? That type of thing. So um, but unfortunately, it's taken me a decade, and other coaches have had a lot of success. I think, other coaches came along the way with, flexible dieting, whereas we have some variability in our food sources, not suggesting you can eat freaking McDonald's. That's not flexible dieting. It's choosing turkey or fish or tofu over steak or whatever is on the plan. That's flexible dieting. But the idea that a flexible dieter can do these great things, and I think that rumor's been dispelled. We've had
Mhm.
athletes in all divisions compete and win titles that have been flexible dieters and these kind of things.
And I think the more rigidity people have, the shorter their career is going to end up being. Now we all know there's coaches that do a great job. They turn a lot of people pro. Um, then most of those people end up fading out with that. It's because, yeah, they got the results in a short term with it, but what happens after the show? right?
Yep.
With that, like there's so much balance that kind of goes in with this.
Show me a
If you just
coach who's
want to
taken
be,
an athlete from novice to the top of their division and they're
yeah,
still with them. That's what I want to see. I don't want to see a coach that has like, he's in a bunch of people's DMs and now he's, hey, look at my athlete. Well, you haven't been coaching that person for a month.
hmm
They were already a champion.
Right.
What does that show me? So that's really where coaching is, right? It's definitely a business. So there's going to be some elements to it that are, um, cloak and dagger and some things going on behind the scenes that people just don't understand. They see their favorite athlete and they go, oh, I want to work with that person's coach. But it's kind of, you got to kind of dig backwards and go, okay, well, where does this come from? Why are they successful? I think one of my favorite phrases is a lot of people are successful in spite of their coach, not because of their
yeah.
coach.
And,
Um,
and that's something I always kind of look at too when people, like, let's say someone's never competed before and they want to go work with a super 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 high level coach, and these people are a beginner. Why do you think that coach is going to give you as much attention as you probably need with it at that? Like there's a balance with certain things with that.
Yeah, it's for me, I give my energy more to the people that need it more, right? So like
Hmm
I have some people that they're just machines. They're machines. They check
hmm
in every week on time and the updates are very smooth and peak weeks are very smooth. And then there's some people that are like overwhelmed by things. But I always feel like if you can get through that phase with a client that's struggling and get them comfortable, those are the ones that are going to be really responding well because you're almost improving their relationship to the sport.
hmm
That's my favorite thing is when I meet an athlete. I'll shout out Samantha Cuevas, who she did the Atlantic Coast, and she did fairly well. We didn't get her quite as conditioned as I wanted, and I expressed her after the show. I said, Samantha, I really think you can be a pro. We just didn't quite nail the conditioning. And her boyfriend came up to me. He's like, dude, you worked miracles from where you got her to where she is now. She's happy, she's healthy, she loves the sport. Um, and I was like, oh, that's what makes me happy, right? It's
hmm
it's not necessarily just like, yes, I want to do great things in the sport, but improving people's relationship to the sport and making it sustainable, that's our jobs as coaches, right? Um, and
It's
and
always cool when you get clients too that like I have this one girl who always tells me she's like she's a hairdresser. She's like my clients keep just telling me how much I'm glowing and how much happier I seem, and it's always
yeah.
cool when you get those people who or those clients who are just telling you, "Oh my gosh, like the people around me even notice that I'm happier, I'm healthier, I'm just enjoying life more." Like that really makes me happy as a coach.
Oh,
and a big
my favorite compliment is from the makeup artists because they see all my girls 3, 4, 5 in the morning, and V and some of her team, and then like Joey, and they'll say to me, I can tell when your clients walk in the room because they're like alive. They look alive. Like there's some girls that just, they've been diuretic and pulled water and then no carbs and no sodium. And by show day, they're basically on the verge of passing out. They're moody. Um, and they're just surviving the day. Whereas like, not for nothing, but I mean, just thinking back from nationals, I think Christina Sangor had 220 carbs in a burger and fries the night before nationals when she turned pro. How do you think she felt show? Like a normal human being. And she won. So it's like it's not, and don't get me wrong, if the only way to win was to do it that way, I think we'd be more open to that. But not only do they look better and feel better, but they they place better when that happens. So as far as cardio goes, I've said this for a long time now. I really have no limitations that I'll place on somebody for doing cardio. Outside of like what time, the time is the most difficult part, right? I have limitations on macros and calories, right? So off season, I want someone's calories to be at least 15 times their body weight if they have, 15 pounds to lose or more. Um, when someone's calories get 10 times their body weight, so Lexie, you're at 105 pounds, say at the end of prep, when you get close to 1,000 calories, that's when I start to go, okay, we need more frequent refeeds. I need to pay attention to your recovery, right? So I have some of these metrics in my mind. When it comes to carbs, when your carbs get below 10 times your body weight. So Lexi, when your carbs go below 100 carbs, I go, okay, we're going to need to make restoring glycogen more frequently. If I have to put you down to 80 or 70 carbs, I know after a couple days, you're going to be pretty depleted. We got to fill you back up. Fats. My number is usually 35. That is my like, okay, that's not a lot of fat for the human body. We got to make sure they're quality sources. You probably need a great fat supplement, but getting that to that 35 number, that's when you're going to start having negative impacts to things like digestion, hormone production, all these things. So that's where I start to worry. But with cardio, my only worry is like how much time you got in the day, because we can do low intensity, steady state. I think I tell you guys this story all the time. I had a girl that couldn't lose weight. She checked in one week, down 6 pounds. I said, "What'd you do?" She's like, "I did nothing different. I followed my plan. I did my cardio." I was like, "Something's different." She's like, "Well, I got a new job." I was like, "Well, what's the job?" She goes, "Oh, I'm cocktail waitressing in a casino."
Hmm.
I was
Walking
like, "Hold
20,000
up.
steps.
So you went from working at a desk to now you're on your feet 12 hours a day and you didn't think anything changed?" And I go, "And you're still doing your cardio?" She's like, "Yeah, I'm still doing my hour of cardio plus walking for 12 hours." And she lost 6 pounds in a week. And that's, I mean, honestly, that was so long ago. That set off alarm bells in my head. I'm like, she sounds great. Why don't we just walk more? It's
Mhm.
so easy.
That's why
If you got time, it's the best thing to do if they got the time to do it.
yeah, yeah. The step goal is a game changer. I mean, especially in prep, like if you're not tracking that need activity or those steps, because if cardio, like on an actual machine, is already pretty high and that person is kind of maxed out at what they can give for more cardio on a machine, I feel like it's really easy to just up that step goal and you can passively get that in sporadically throughout the day. You can get that in pretty easily just at your leisure throughout the day. And it's a great way to raise that need.
I
Mhm.
even think it helps reduce a little bit of the hunger. Like, so I notice when I get up and walk in the morning, I'm not immediately hungry. Like I get up and do my walk and I sit down and work for a while before I even get that hunger signal. So yeah, I don't place a lot of limitations on cardio outside of the requirement for the time, right? So like that's where I'll start to increase the intensity. If I have someone that's like, okay, I only have this much time because I've got kids and job and blah blah blah, I'll be like, okay, can you get a treadmill at your house? Okay, can we do? Okay, can you do something? I had one competitor. She worked in a secure facility, so she couldn't leave during the day. She was there for like 10 hours. So I was like, well, can you do something at work? And she's like, actually, I can walk in the stairwell of her high rise. So she would literally, every time she got a break, go walk for 30 minutes in the stairs. Like it worked for her. But, that was something that again, it's one of those things you go, oh, cardio doesn't need to be like I go to the gym and I do my cardio. It can just be movement. Um,
And they
yeah.
make so many cool things nowadays too. I mean, I know that we've all heard of like the step pad that you can put under your desk, but they also make like a little stationary kind of bike you can put under your desk too. Like there are so many nifty things you can buy and you can add in movement while you're even just at a desk.
The,
Yeah.
the the
So
best comparison I like to make is look at the people that are typically the leanest and they don't stop moving. They're fidgeting, they're moving, their knees bouncing. There's something. They're constantly moving individuals.
So you
Yeah.
just brought up it's called the fidget factor, and it's actually been studied. I did a video on this the other day. They overfed people in an office setting. They took a group of people that worked in the same office, the same job. They overfed them by, I think it was 800 calories a day across the board. Some people lost weight. And you know what happened? You know what they noticed? The people that they overfed started fidgeting more. They got up and walked more. They're like you said, they're bouncing their knee. So these fidgeting calories are actually quite substantial, and it's actually one of the things that they notice about people that are at or below normal healthy weights. It's that they just move more. And I think I'm one of those people. I just remember as a kid, like playing sports, and between games when everyone would take a break, I couldn't take a break. I would keep shooting baskets, or I would just, yeah, like I'm a fidgeter by nature. So now
That's
that
fun.
changes over time. The older you get,
I'm
you fidget
definitely
less.
I'm the same way. My dad this past week, I mean, I can't remember the last time I've spent like a whole week at home with him. He's like, "You just never like sit down or stop." And even I laid down one night because I was kind of tired and he's like, "Are you okay? Are you feeling okay? Are you sick?" I'm like, I just yeah, I don't even notice it within myself. I'm just so used to it, but yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a way to track fidgeting. Probably not, but I mean, now they track steps. Maybe that'll be the next thing. But yeah, so you nailed it on the head, dude. Fidgeting is actually something that increases when some people overconsume calories. So it's why when people are like arguing like, oh, the laws of thermodynamics, you can't cut someone's calories and up their cardio and they don't lose weight. That's impossible. No, it's not. Their
They move
body
less.
adjusts. They fidget less. I do not move at the end of prep. When I'm 5% body fat, I am a freaking statue. You
You can
cannot
serve
pry me away from
on
this desk. I'm like, I know I need to eat lunch and I know I need to go to the bathroom. I'm going to save it all for one trip. Like I'll literally
Mhm.
start to like come up with plans to conserve energy.
Oh, I do the same thing. Like I have a trash chute down the hallway. It's not that far, but it's where I take my trash out. And like there were many times in prep where I'm like, I'll just do that in the morning. Like literally it's barely down the hallway, but it's just
Yeah.
silly how you
Yeah.
consume energy so much.
Yep. You'll even be like, I'm hungry, but do I really want to get up? Like,
Right.
Mhm.
Yes.
what,
Do we want to
what
touch
was the
uh
comedian Mitch Hedberg? He said, sometimes when I'm laying in bed and I'm thinking of a joke, I have to decide, is the joke funny enough for me to get up and write it down? Like,
oh goodness. Do we want to touch on kind of one of our last things being the training and like the
yeah,
recovery?
I think this is the huge one, and I'll let Evan talk about this one because he and I did a video on my channel where I went and trained with him a few weeks out from stage, and I brought
Mhm.
George and we documented it pretty good. And I talked to you a little bit about your training philosophy because you were
Mhm.
0% body fat at that point, so it was like I was like, okay, trying to get in your head because I know, you know, I have my theories and thoughts how things change in prep. So let's talk about it, Evan.
Mhm. There's obviously stages in prep, right? Like at the beginning of prep, when food is higher, typically you can push harder. Uh, I look at everything in prep like gas in a tank, right? We only have so much gas to be able to put forth for certain things. And when it comes to training, especially towards the end of prep, I am a big proponent of less is more when it comes to that. Make sure your sets count, make sure they're good, but don't throw in junk volume or anything like that. And actually reducing the amount of time you train or the days you train to increase recovery towards the end can be incredibly beneficial too. Paul, we've talked about this. I a lot of times I will actually decrease people's training from 5 days a week to 4 days a week leading into shows if their cardio needs to go a little bit higher, because that's going to
Mhm.
help with the recovery aspect of things with it. And it's not about just going in and going through the motions too. It's making sure that everything you do is intentional. And I'm a big proponent of like reps in reserve too, because you can't literally go to failure on every single set. And I think people are ingrained more is always better. Now there is a line there, right? You need to train hard. So first of all, you have to know what training hard looks like and feels like before you can have any barometer off of that. But once you know that, you get about one good working set, one, maybe two per movement. You don't need a lot more towards the end of prep because then you're just going to burn through everything. You're going to burn through all your glycogen. You're going to be flat as a board all the time. And that's going to, you obviously have to be flat during a prep, right? But there's degrees to this that we need to go.
Yeah, I think the other thing is the leaner you get, the less and less likely you are to be adding a significant amount of muscle. So there is a vast difference between the amount of training volume you need to maintain muscle and the amount of training volume you need to increase muscle.
Mhm.
Increasing muscle means you need to be either through intensity techniques, either through weight or frequency, you are increasing training volume over time. At the end of prep, that's damn near impossible, right? And it's almost, it can be dangerous, right? You don't, especially if you're hormonally compromised, um, meaning that you're not
Injuries.
at those fantastic off-season, hormones. You're also so lean that you can risk more damage to soft tissues like ligaments and tendons. You see competitors get hurt at the end of prep because, Dorian Yates famously like had that, I'm going to train like this all the way through prep. And at the end of his career, he had multiple tears that probably ended his career. Um, so maintaining muscle is quite easy. It's almost ridiculous. It's like 3 sets of 10 per week will maintain a muscle. That's probably going to be a little bit higher for the non-average competitor, right? But the ability to keep muscle at the end of prep is not predicated on the fact that you're training like you were in prime off season. So yeah, like I love what Evan said about the training frequency. 4 days, especially if you're doing like a one full upper day and one full lower day, you can get all the volume you need in those 4 days. Then you've got 3 full days where you're not beating yourself up. A lot of people don't think about it, but training is very damaging. Lots of inflammation, and you
Yeah.
know what else is funny? I thought about it this week. So I decided to take a week off of training. It was just going to be impossible going to the mountains, doing all these things. My hunger just plummeted. So
Yep.
like when I'm not doing leg days or back days, those days make me the hungriest. You know, I don't care how hard you train arms and chest. It's just they're not big muscle groups. But back and leg days, I'm like ravenous for the next 24 hours. And my hunger signals, I mean, I would literally be like 8 o'clock at night and I'd be like, I've eaten once today. And I was
Mhm.
okay with it because I'm just like, I need a week off of the life. But it just got me thinking, like, if you pull out some of that intensity, might actually help with a competitor coming out of a show or getting close to a show.
And I
And
think
you have to think about what training is. Training is breaking down the muscle. That's why you lift weights, to break down the muscle. And if your food is low and your movement is very high, there's not a ton to repair that muscle at that point for most people. So it's about trying to balance that. And it's harder
Mhm.
for newer competitors, right? And it's hard as a coach to, you can tell them this is how things should be done, but it's all internalized by the athlete too. So that's where time with a coach is also helpful, and trial and error. And if you look at people like, okay, you're looking a little tired here, and convincing them to back off is sometimes very hard. But if they actually do it and they see the benefits from it, they look cleaner, they look fresher, they look better. I'm not saying to go in there and don't work hard. Like, you want to work hard, but there is a line there. But that goes to our mentality of bodybuilding too, that in our brains, we think more is always better.
yeah. Yep. And I think I see a big pro too towards the end of a prep, bringing down training frequency to 4 days. It definitely allows more time to do cardio too, if that's something we need to be bringing up. But it also just helps with general inflammation. It's all about quality over quantity, right? I'd much rather have a
General information.
competitor do 4 workouts at 100% rather than 5 or 6 workouts at like 60%, but I find that just not overtraining, especially towards the end of prep, helps a lot with how the body's able to recover. But from that inflammation standpoint, you see those people looking a lot less like
Tired.
puffy. Their weight is typically dropping. We're not sitting at a standstill, because sometimes at the end of prep, a competitor is seemingly doing everything they should be doing, but they're not dropping weight, and it's just from sheer inflammation.
Well, and
Mhm.
guess what else happens in peak week when we talked about this before? You don't usually train very hard the last couple days. You don't train on show day. You don't train on Sunday, and then you come back and you feel stronger. So a lot of the times, in prep, people will report to me like, the weights feel very heavy this week. That's my okay. That's my indication. Okay, we're gonna drop. We're gonna take a deload week, or maybe go to a 4 day week. Training for a little bit. And then you'll hear them like, oh, everything. I feel strong again. I feel my muscles are really full, because it's also hard to get a pump when you're constantly just beating those muscles up and they're not recovering. So it starts to be mentally difficult. I've often said prep is more mentally challenging than physically. Like, we can put our bodies through hell, but it's when you look at yourself in the mirror and you don't look the way you used to look, and you can't lift the weights you used to lift, and your shirts don't fit the way you used to fit. Like, someone you haven't seen in a while might be like, "Oh, you're looking a little thin." Like, those might seem like minor things, but they add up. And I've had a lot of people be like, "Yeah, I was in prep, but I didn't get to stage because this stuff." And I was like,
Oh, so many.
I remember that. I remember that very clearly, my first prep. And the only thing that really got me through it was looking at pictures of the competitors and thinking, I'm not there yet. I'm not where Brian
Mhm.
Whitaker is. So I'm not ready. And I had that mentality going into the prep. Like, I'm no longer trying to be the biggest bodybuilder on the planet. I'm trying to be the most shredded bodybuilder
Yep.
on the planet. Right. And that mental switch for me just made it easier. And the other thing was, I can always put the weight back on. That's always going to be there. The show's going to happen and I can do whatever I want after. The food's going to be there after. But when you walk out under those lights, they're not judging how long you prepped for, who your coach was. They're judging the physique. So you've got to do everything in your power to look the best you can that day. Conditioning is generally going to be, you know, the most important thing on a bodybuilding stage. Like, you can have all the muscle in the
Mhm.
world. If you're not conditioned, even the judges are going to be like, damn, dude, why aren't you leaner?
Yep. And
Yeah.
I've mentioned this before, and it's something I think newer competitors need to understand. I When I got dieted down for the first probably 5 years I competed, I didn't even look like a bodybuilder. It's only been the last few years I'm dieted down. People like obviously assume I'm a bodybuilder now because I have the muscle to support
Yeah.
that. It doesn't happen overnight, right?
Right.
Don't judge how you look in clothes and what people say if you're newer to the sport, because you're not going to look like a competitor, because you're not
Oh,
going to
no,
have enough muscle yet to be at that level with it.
no. The
Now,
good
when you
news
take
is,
your shirt
Evan,
off,
they
different.
make string tank tops.
They do.
Gymshark makes a really nice one. Is that a thing
Just
still,
wear those all
Gymshark?
the time.
Yeah. Hey, listen, I wore string. I had the golds. I remember buying the Golds gym, like my local Golds. I bought like a stringer. Man, I wore
Oh,
that thing on chest day. I was so excited. And I'd get a pump. And I mean, I probably was 170 pounds walking around the gym like a cock
Mm.
of the walk. Let's go.
that's hilarious.
170 pounds at 6'3". I promise you guys. I'm not trying to brag.
Oh, Paul, my first stage weight was 174. Yep.
Yeah,
At
if I would have
6'3".
competed in my 20s, my first stage weight was 199 at 32 years old after training for 15 years. Yeah,
Mhm.
so yeah, yeah.
Fun times.
All right, we've been going for a bit now, so I feel like we've given a lot of people a lot of information on how to be prepared to not screw up their prep. Maybe
Yes.
that's what we call this. How not
Yeah.
to, how not, don't F your prep.
Don't F up your prep. That's what I'll title it. I
Don't F
like
your
it.
P.
All right. Well, I think we're off to a good start for 2024. As always, guys, if you want a free consultation, go to prophysique.com and just click the consultation button. We set up phone calls before we ever decide on prep, so we want to make sure it's a good fit for you, for us, and let's see some faces this year. Make sure if you're out and about at shows, come say hi to us. We got a lot of events we're going to be at this year, and leave us a review. That really does help us. If you're still listening, you're obviously following along, and we really appreciate it. So go to the podcast review button and leave a
Or
review.
comment on the YouTube too. I think that helps,
Yeah.
and that's nice to see.
If you're watching on YouTube, definitely I try to reply to every commenter. So definitely if you're watching on YouTube, just scroll down, hit reply, or ask a question or a topic. I had a great topic idea. A young lady asked me, could you do a discussion on masters divisions and competing? And I was like, that's a great idea.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I had multiple masters IFBB pro champions this year. So maybe I'll do a podcast with one of them and get them on here, because I think as a masters competitor, it's unclear the path you should take. What should you be doing? Should you be doing open? Should you be doing masters? Right. So, and the landscape's a little bit different. You know, the way to get a pro card's a little different. The way to qualify for nationals a little different. And then once you're a pro, what is the Olympia for masters competitors? Is it the World Championships in Pittsburgh? Is it the new Masters Olympia that they're doing every other year? There's lots of things to discuss. So I think, thank you for leaving that comment. If you guys have an idea for a podcast, that's what gets us jacked up. We want to add value to your day, along with getting this stuff out of our brains that we've collected.
Yes.
Anything
Good way to
else?
put it.
I think
All right,
that's it.
guys. All right. That's the Pro Physique Code. Talk
Bye,
to you guys in the
guys.
next one.